It's a good thing I'm only
I might have ended up with a disease.
Did you read the article? I should ask you that. That's not fair. Okay.
You promise not to put us on
What
the
do you
spot.
think about the article? How's that? I promise not to put you on the spot. What did you think about the article? Black men, violence, and fierce urgency.
I think the line that stood out for me is like such a rigid statement was the road to America's prosperity either plowed through black and poor communities
Yes.
or literally designed and passed by them. That really was a statement that really questioned, it really starts to speak to the disparities of, just income, economics, educational, all these issues that create racial divisions in America. The quest for success and prosperity is still everybody's mind, but others, some have more access than others do. This is part of the challenge of literally the infrastructure of America.
It's not only just the roads too. During the Clinton administration, I served on the first EPA Economic Justice Council under Harold Browner. And we studied the systematic placement of power plants, waste plants, dumps, all around in rural poverty areas because those people had no voice. And the council was attempting to bring that to light in the American Policymaking Forum. I do not feel we were successful, although there is still an Economic Justice Council at EPA. I don't think that its voice is being heard. But there are paint factories in rural communities that are not in rich communities, and disposal sites in rural communities that are not anywhere near.
You'd never find them in a
Never
rural
find
community.
them.
No. Right.
And even the development of the social welfare programs, which were, supposedly designed to assist lower income families. I work in social services. I've been there 31 years. But the AFTC program, the welfare program, the way that was designed with the benefits to women and children only if there was not a man in the home, I think has been one of the most single destructive forces of the family structure of lower income Americans, whether they be black or white. It has torn at the fabric of the American family. Everything else is blamed for it, all other kinds of social conditions. But institutionally, the development of that program for women's and children only, driving men in lower income families from the home, has continued that circle of poverty and created a destruction and a devaluation of men, primarily African American men, but truly of all low income men in lower income families. There is some change to that now. It's starting to change a little bit, but that I just see that as one of the most destructive forces that has any policy that the government has created in an attempt to help disenfranchised people.
I would say though that, I would say that it's so much of this is unintended consequences. I mean, it's not, I don't believe that people start out at the top with ill motives to hurt other people. They see a problem. Women and children there are widows and orphans, as we see in the Bible. Let's do something to help them. And nobody thinks down the road, about this.
I would disagree with you, Sandy.
Yeah.
I would disagree. I think there may be some that are unintended consequences. But there is no doubt that the discrimination, that the distinction between legal consequences for the use of cocaine and the use of crack is an intentional consequence.
Okay,
It is an intentional consequence. the widespread concern we see about the heroin epidemic today
Yes.
is an intended consequence, because who takes heroin? Rich white kids.
Yes.
And they are the ones who are going to be protected by the movement to put into place treatment as opposed to punishment for heroin and cocaine use. And that is an intended consequence.
When I look back over the stages of the entire movement, civil rights movement, and other things that have happened, I see a destructive mechanism that has been in place with the vision in the African American community that things are going to get better as a result of the civil rights movement and the end of discrimination. I totally believe that we did ourselves more harm than good when we started moving and being able to have access to certain opportunities and liberties as a result of the civil rights movement. When I grew up, we realized where we were not allowed to go, what we were not allowed to do. So in that sense, we created an environment where blacks could flourish.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We had entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. We owned our own businesses. We had our own movie theaters, clothing stores, or what have you.
Social clubs, vacation
Exactly.
spots,
And
everything.
as a result of the civil rights movement and us now being able to go into the various stores, to go into restaurants, or what have you, we as African Americans stopped supporting our own businesses. And because we feel that we had arrived, we stopped fighting for the freedoms that this so-called civil rights movement and Civil Rights Act afforded us. So consequently, it did more damage to us because now we become complacent in where we are, and we don't see the need to continue the fight. And because of that, it continues to perpetuate itself. And now we find ourselves dependent upon the federal government to take care of us and do things that we once did for ourselves.
Amen. Now, what I would caution on is the wording when you said the civil rights movement. There were some positives that could have
Yes.
come with the civil rights movement that definitely I don't want them thrown away, but I can remember the media person at our school telling us in an integrated situation, this integration is going to be failed. It's going to be the destruction of us.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened to blacks in America. Because what it did was to take the locus of control from those of us who had it.
Yeah.
And
The black upper
everything
class.
was then coming from this one top, irregardless of humanity, irregardless of humanity.
There was a social structure in place
Yes.
that we rely upon our own abilities, ingenuities, vision, okay, to make life meaningful for those in our communities, for our children. There was a nurturing environment in our schools, and I'm not saying the whites did not have it as well,
No.
okay?
But when we got together, it didn't work as
But
well.
the reality is,
Yeah.
like, I never saw a white teacher until my senior year of high school. Not one. The thing that I knew I could count on, though, was that the teachers that were in our schools, and I grew up went to a segregated school in the South, Augusta, Georgia. I knew that they cared about me.
Yes.
I knew that they were looking out for my best interests.
Yes.
So that when I had a problem or if I got in trouble,
Yes.
my parents knew about it before I got home. Because my teachers were going to make that phone call. Why? Because my teachers grew up with my mother. So there was no question that I was going to be held accountable. But when we were in that segregated environment, we knew what the expectations were. We knew what the requirements were. And we would not veer far from it unless without realizing that there's a price to be paid for it. And in our communities, we went to church with the lawyers, with the doctors, with the teachers, and those who aspired to do other things because they were our mentors. They were the ones that we looked up to. But now with the integration that is taking place, we're so dispersed that there's no sense of community. And with a lack of community, the opportunity for flourishing and engaging in those educational, professional opportunities are very far and few between because we have no one that we can relate to in our own communities.
That's exactly what I meant about the unintended consequences. Segregation was bad. It needed to be gotten rid of. But it had great value in certain areas, which got lost, or this midwife, the Holy Spirit is the midwife of change. We're still in the middle of that.
You're also
birth.
talking about a major systemic change.
Yes.
And when you change a system that has been in place for a time, no matter, and you're right, I mean, but when you change a system that's been in place for a time, if it's not managed carefully,
Yes, that's it.
the consequences of changing that system can be really very different than
Devastating.
what you expected the outcome to be.
Yes.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in the sense of, and also it's top-down stuff. Top-down stuff. Things that work, that really work in changing a system, come from the smaller communities and within. They don't come from being told and dictated to from the top down. And while the intentions, I think, were great, there also have been consequences. And I think when you read this article, some of those consequences are being expressed right here.
Now, so we created a system, but we didn't create the infrastructure to support the system. We basically built a road with no supports.
Absolutely.
And the supports for that is essentially, in the big picture, is black identity. I'm thinking about, I wasn't around during the time, but I'm pretty sure black nationalism was not very popular among American culture. But that was the idea to recreate, that was the infrastructure to support the systemic change. But it was rejected by most of America as being terroristic, essentially.
Right.
And the problem is that as we did that, as you did not build the infrastructure as America, we held on to the dismissal of the black identity, which Bill talks about, the dismissal of black bodies. We continue to dismiss black bodies, so this is where we get this propagation of violence that's happened in black communities, and the police respond to it and watch the data, and this is where we get the increased patrolling of black communities, increased shooting on all this Black Lives Movement. All this is built out of the 1960s failure to reconstruct a society, as well as multiple other times before. But Blow really hits the idea that a lot of this is built on dismissing the black identity. And we dismiss the black identity, which is what happens with black on black violence. You basically dismiss the black identity because there's no role models as we had before. And then the police are watching those trends, so they go and patrol those areas more, and they start shooting people in those communities more, which is where you get black on black, the Black Lives Matter, even though that's only 7% of black homicides, it's a different story. The challenge becomes, how do we come to a new place to do what segregation did in the community, but do what integration was intended to do at the same time. That's what it's talking about, this bifurcation.
I think that black community that you were talking about, that supportive network, is clearly present in the black churches today. And here we are in this group attempting to integrate our churches. How do we do that and retain the integrity and the support and the culture and nature of the black church today?
Well, first, I believe it starts with sharing and opening dialogues, worshiping together. I see one of the difficulties that I see with many of us is we don't understand what worship is in each other's church. It's different, but it's the same God.
Yeah.
Okay? And until we start talking with one another and sharing with one another and spending time with one another, then in sharing our experiences, our histories, what have you, so that there's a better understanding of who we are and not just what someone says either on television or in the newspapers or news articles about us, because we're flesh and blood. We understand, we hurt, we have dreams just like anyone else. But until we start tearing down some of the barriers that separate us, it will never happen. The reality is, just as the civil rights movement had its infancy and the strength of its movement was in the church, in order to, I believe, resolve the issues, it begins in the church. And it begins not just in black churches or white churches, it begins in all churches. And if pastors and their membership would come together and realize that we are all God's children, that together we can accomplish more than we can apart, and have a heart and love for humankind, period. That's the antidote. And if we put that into practice, not just when we're in church, okay? Because the most segregated time in America is Sunday morning.
Been together.
Yeah, my brother has a statement.
I continually hear the idea that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week. We very much acknowledge that, but we never talk about why. It's the most segregated day of the week. The history of us being in the same church, but some in the balcony, some on the floor, some wanting to have leadership roles, as in St. George United Methodist Church in Philadelphia, where Rich Allen stormed out because of the inability. I mean, this is the reason, and part of the issue of today, which is, as a pastor of a black church, I question the strength of the black church to have that role of unity, because the church is bought into the capitalistic market of America overall. So the idea of individual prosperity and success and wealth propagates to all the churches. So how does the sin remove the demon of capitalism from itself? Is the only way it can actually come together in unity.
Until we start addressing the question of why, though, we can complain all we want to. And we can observe all we want to. But what you're doing in here is beginning to address the question of why. And it's only in doing that that we're really going to come to some understanding of what the barriers are and how we change them. Thank you. Good discussion.
Jack Parsons placed the phone back on its cradle and pressed his fingers to his temples. That was his 11th phone call about what had taken place yesterday between Hope Barrows and Dylan Johnson, two hardworking, valuable members of the firm. Each caller had been very upset, and now the firm, or at least all people under Jack's purview, seemed to be splitting into two angry camps, with one group saying, "We won't work in a racist environment," and the other saying, "If a woman can't feel safe in the parking lot of her own company, that's pretty bad." The story was really quite simple. The basic facts were not in dispute. Hope, a partner at Fuller Fenton, had gone to the office on Sunday afternoon to get a jump on the work week, as she often did. When she arrived at the parking garage, she swiped her access card and the exterior door opened. As she drove up to the inner gate, the usual point of security during business hours, when the garage door was open, Dylan pulled in under the exterior door as it was closing. Hope stopped at the gate and, instead of swiping her card, got out of her car and walked over to Dylan. She asked who he was and whether he belonged in the building. Dylan told her he was an associate at Fuller Fenton. Hope asked to see his identification, and he showed her his card. Hope thanked him, went back to her car, and entered the garage. Hope is Asian, and Dylan is black. Dylan was angry, actually appalled. He had called Jack early that morning. He had said that the incident was an indication that the firm was racially biased. Judging from the calls that Jack had received, most of the firm's African-American partners and associates agreed. Jack asked Dillon to tell him exactly what had happened.
I was working out of my health club when I received a call on my cell phone from another associate, Sean Daniels. We had planned to meet at the office later that afternoon. Sean asked if we could push our meeting because he had to be somewhere at 4 p.m. I said sure, grabbed my things and drove to the office straight from the gym. I pulled into the driveway of the company garage behind a new silver Volvo and started looking through my clothes, which were in a pile on the passenger seat, for my wallet and my access card. Then the door opened. The Volvo went through and I didn't even think. I just followed. Then the car stopped again. I thought, what is this? And I tried to see who was in the car. I could see that it was a woman, and she was looking at me in her rearview mirror. So I waved to her and then waited. She got out of her car, came over to me and asked if I work in the building. I said yes, and she asked me for my identification. I recognized her, you know. I didn't know her name, but had seen her somewhere in the building. I was really confused. I didn't know what her problem was. Then I realized that she thought I had slipped through the door behind her because I was some sort of criminal. I'm black and she is Asian. Most people at the company are white. Case closed in her mind. I told her my name, found my wallet, showed her my identification. But Jack, I have to tell you, at that moment, all I could think was that this wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel like an outsider at this company because I'm black. When I signed on, I heard a lot of talk about how Fuller Fenton was reinventing itself as an incredibly diverse, versatile organization. But my experience tells a different story. During my first week here, one of the administrative assistants saw my wedding photo that I have on my desk. She looked really surprised and then said, "Your wife is very light-skinned." I laughed and said something like, "Amy is white." But you should have seen the look I got. It was disapproving, almost like she was disgusted. I know I could cut her some slack. She is one of the other older assistants, and she's been here a long time, but it stung. She hasn't talked to me directly since. That was the smallest incident. After 4 months here, I was going to be on the team for that customer goods company in Texas. Do you remember that I was put on and taken off within 48 hours? I later found out that the partner heading the team was worried that a black face would put the client off. Maybe the guy had a point. That client is very old-time kind of company. But still, if this company is serious about diversity, is that any way to behave? That is not the kind of company I thought that I was joining. And it is certainly not the kind of company that I'm going to keep working for. I called 4 or 5 colleagues last night, and I asked them if I was imagining this. And they said no. This time it can't just be water under the bridge, Jack.
Jack knew that the earlier story about the client was correct. In fact, he had argued with his partner about the way Dillon had been treated at that time. And he had hoped then that it would have been one of those things he could work to prevent from happening again. Jack reassured Dillon as best he could. He told Dillon that he was a valued employee, that he would do some digging, and that they would all work to resolve the situation. As soon as he hung up the phone, he called Hope and left a message asking her to come see him.
I tried to call you earlier. I have heard a lot of rumors going around about what happened yesterday, and I have to tell you, I'm completely shocked. I didn't ask for Dillon Johnson's identification because he was black. I asked for it because I was freaked out that a man was following me into the garage. A man who didn't seem to have an access card of his own. I was only concerned for my own safety. He could have been white or purple for all I cared. I thought there was a good chance I was going to be robbed or even raped. Asking for identification was a fair thing to do.
Jack asked Hope to sit down and suggests she start from the beginning.
I often come to the office on Sundays. Occasionally, I will see other cars in the garage, and sometimes I'll see people coming and going. But I didn't recognize Dylan's Taurus, and I didn't recognize Dylan. Was he thinking, Jack? I'm not the only one who was insensitive here. Dylan Johnson was insensitive to me by piggybacking behind me when I opened the garage door. Didn't he know that any woman would feel vulnerable and potentially threatened if any man or anybody, truth to be told, evaded security measures to follow her into a deserted garage? Why didn't he just wait the extra 15 seconds and use his own card? You know, I really never should have gotten out of the car. I should have just called security, but I was thinking better to confront him now than put myself in the possible jeopardy deep in the garage with no one else around. To be honest with you, I was also thinking about my two friends who have been mugged. One in a parking garage and the other on a subway platform. Neither was hurt. Well, my friend Alice strained her hand trying to twist away from the subway mugger, but she got off easy considering. And I was thinking about what my husband asked me 2 years ago when I started coming here on Sundays. He asked me if I was sure it was safe to come in the building when it was deserted. He asked me to carry a cell phone in my hand when I got out of the car. I had punched in 911 and my finger was on the send button. I did not recognize him, and I didn't recognize his car. He was wearing a tank top t-shirt. Not that that matters really, no one dresses up here on Sundays. Still, no one usually wears a tank top t-shirt either. I did feel a little silly at one point before I got out of the car. I mean, I was telling myself whoever it was just coming into work and had been too lazy to get out his car. But being scared overruled feeling silly. And in no way was I acting out of any racial prejudice. Come on, Jack, this guy has some personal chip on his shoulder and he's putting all of his baggage on me. I was scared, for heaven's sake.
Jack listened, and at the end of the meeting with Hope, told her that he would think about what to do. It was clear, he said, that she and Dylan should sit down in the same room to discuss the issue. He would set up that meeting and get back to her.
All right, now, keeping in mind, I asked you to put that little word power in the back of your mind. There's some questions here. If you were Jack, how would you have handled the situation? Jack, remember, is the person who's in charge of human resources, probably the EEO officer if there is one. If you were Jack, what would you do next?
I'd definitely bring them together and have a three-way conversation and listen. We'll work on some of the listening things you all helped us look at last night.
Okay.
Reflective listening, mirroring.
And I hope he'll put in his bag of tricks that when another situation comes up, like that guy being pulled off, that they will air it out then and not just hope that it will go away. It clearly didn't.
Yeah, I don't think this is about the incident in the garage. Because I think the incident in the garage, all of us can see both sides. All of us can recognize the validity of both sides. I think this is about the underlying culture that would allow that black man to feel that he was being confronted because of his blackness. So I think that the solution is not so much dealing with this as, because he's already notified other colleagues. So it's no longer just a two-person conflict. This is a conflict that is going to discuss the culture of the corporation, and I think that's where they need to go.
Yes.
I think the irony of the whole situation, what Jack would do is he would resolve it by, well, speaking first as Jack being Jack, he would resolve it by addressing the company policy on swiping your card coming in the building.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that's what,
That's at the root cause of what
yeah,
happened
they could have
before we
taken
get to
away
anyway.
the whole,
So it's technically a breach of policy of entering the building, is how they're going to resolve it. XYZ. But Jack is not going to address, because usually corporations and for-profit companies don't deal with cultural dynamics until we get to court. Right. So I think Jack is going to try to do everything he can to make everybody happy, to make a win-win situation. I've been in corporate. They create a win-win situation for all parties involved in here. But Jack is not going to deal with the underlying cultures that both Dylan and Hope bring to the workplace. And that's what I think the problem is that he's not going to deal with it. He's going to deal with company policy, make everybody happy, make sure sales are happy.
Sales service.
That's kind of, that's our challenge in America.
And what would it look like if he were going to deal with the underlying culture? Or what? I don't know.
It's a counter narrative to corporate America. Nobody's going to speak to the underlying issues of that because, well, we all wash our hands. We're here to make money for the company. He'd have to deal with some things that is deep inside of himself. I'm assuming it doesn't speak to Jack's race. I'm assuming Jack to be a white man, and he has to deal with the issues of both what affects women and Asian women and black people and black men all together. And for him, the question is, can he see beyond his own blinders?
What would you do if you were Jack?
Fire everybody. Well, the problem is, why I gotta be Jack? I would bring them together in the room. First I would do it. You gotta swipe your card when you come back. Like, it's part of the idea of safety is the idea we're all coming in at the same time. Policy. Number two, the issue that he has to bring them together. If I were Jack in a situation, I would have them speak to their fears. Because their fears is what caused them to feel how they felt. She felt a certain way. She already had the phone dial 911 ready for the send button. She got out of the car in fear. One, she shouldn't have got out of the car. Two, this is the story with the camel's back. This isn't the first issue of race that Dylan's experienced. That's part of the challenge.
Right.
He may have tried to bring it to Jack's attention before, and it may or may not have happened. Jack may have said, "Oh, that's just how that person is," or that other person is. But the issues of race seems to be very much in the burden, because it comes to a point of saying, this is the end. This is struggle with the camel's back. I'm really ready to call it quits with this company. He says that, and he calls people up and says, "Am I going crazy?" They're like, "No." And I think part of it is the denial that racism exists, and the denial that sexism happens is what I think Jack is not seeing possibly in the whole situation.
Well,
Which got us like this.
And both of these people are ascribing, neither of these folks has any understanding of the motivation that is driving the other person's discomfort in this situation. They have their own issues, and it is their own issues and no perception of the other person's issues that is contributing to the lack of dialogue. And honestly, like Lori pointed out earlier, we're here talking about race, but gender is an issue too. And a non-African American female probably has no true appreciation of what it's like to be an African American male in that situation, and no male of any race or ethnic background probably has an understanding of what it feels like for a female to be in that situation.
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into some of this. Why did Hope get out of the car?
That's
Why? Who's got a couple of clues? There's some clues in here.
She's a partner.
Yes.
Power.
Power.
Yes.
She's a partner. She had a Volvo. He had a Taurus. So she, somewhere inside, she felt that she had some power that would allow her to go on and put herself in that precarious situation because of whoever it was that her opponent was. All right?
So power supersedes common sense?
It's also that she's protecting the company.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the piece.
She's the spokesperson for the company, so she's protecting the company. She just wants to make sure that all the company is secured, and her role as partner to take that
And
responsibility.
also, might she also have felt that she could cow the black man because she had power?
No way.
Right there.
Not
That she believed that she had power over this man that she saw with his shirt off, or
Tank top.
whatever kind of shirt that he was wearing, and that she, at least initially, had the upper hand because he was going to be either afraid of her or back off or do something. But she had power right from her own being.
So the power dynamic is real, and it makes you do stupid stuff. It was really stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But I wonder also, you know, she's in there and she considers calling
Yes.
security and says she doesn't because she doesn't think it's a good idea to be alone with a stranger until security gets there. And
She gets out of the car and walks.
Right, then you get out. But the other thing that would have been going through my mind if I had been in that situation would be, is calling security overreacting? Because there could be a legitimate reason that this guy is in the garage, which is exactly what the situation turns out to be. There is a legitimate reason for this guy to be in the garage, and if she had called security, that would have been an overreaction once we find out what the situation actually is.
So there were many things going on,
Right.
yes.
I think what that teaches me is we all live out of power without knowing we are even doing it or thinking about
Yes.
it. It was
Yes.
stupid to get out of the car, but she's living out of power.
Yeah. One of the participants in a workshop we did a few weeks ago said, among other things, when you have, and he's a member of a huge law firm, you have pictures of everybody. And in orientation, you make sure everybody knows everybody, don't care how big it is. Because remember, she said she'd never seen him. He had seen her around the building, but didn't really know who she was. So there are things that, and some corporations do that, and do get involved in orientations that address these kinds of things. But, yeah, interesting role play, right? And this is very true to life, happens every day. Yeah.
The position that Jack has, there's a level of responsibility that he also incurs as a human resources person for the company. Because even though this situation is true to life, the things that have happened, especially when you look at Dylan's experiences and what have you, are things that should be brought to the attention of all of the partners to ensure that the right environment and commitment to diversity that they say they support is in fact being implemented. And making a decision that, and I know it's about, in many respects, it's about making money. But if you're going to create an environment that allows individuals to freely be who they are and to work freely within the company based upon their talents, skills, knowledges, and abilities, do you really want to do business with someone who is not supportive of all people, to be inclusive? And I understand many companies, most companies, money is the bottom line, that's what they look at. But certain moral and ethical decisions need to be made as well in determining how you're going to function as a company because of the impact that it has on the people who work for you and work with you.
I do feel that they very much so need some diversity training or something going on around it. Because even she was stereotyping him from the very beginning, from his car that he drove to the shirt that he had on, and all of that says, you know, that just you're not part of us. And then helping him to be aware there are expectations, or maybe he just got up, went on, did what he normally do. Culturally, there's just total differences.
Yeah. I submit to you that there's a way to think about this. Yes.
Oh, now, I was gonna say, I was thinking about Hope, that if she had so much authority, and she had enough nerve to get out of the car and speak to this person, I think she should have used that as a teachable moment and even said to him, you know, it's going to come down to a meeting anyway about procedure and how you come into the building. I'm saying if you have that much authority, which I'm kind of thinking that she's up there with Jack, why not say something to him at that point? You know, make sure you use your key as you enter. You know, or just, you know, she could have said it in a nice way where he never would have even known that she
Say it
had
with a
any
smile and stick your hand in
that
the
she
window
had
and
that
shake
she had any
hands.
thoughts that he was in there, you know, illegally or anything. You know, I'm saying if you're gonna get out and confront the person, why not use it in a very positive?
You can see that that's not where she was.
But she could have, and that could have maybe maybe that could have squashed the whole all of his feelings.
Maybe she just thought she had power, because I agree with you. If she had really been in a power position there, that would have been exactly, and had the good of the company at heart. That's exactly what
She
they would
wasn't
have.
white.
In any of his
That's the
feelings-
point, that's
what I'm
the
saying.
point, that's the point.
Right, right.
I don't think that was the point.
But
I would have been frightened by anyone in that situation.
Maybe you, but she wasn't.
She wasn't, because
She wasn't.
you probably wouldn't have gotten out.
I
And
would not have gotten out.
yeah, but I'm saying if you're gonna take it there,
But when she did get out, and
Yeah.
then she was talking to him and had his card in her hand, saying, "Oh, you work on the 10th floor. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
See you, you know, you know."
you can dissolve.
But the fact is that her primary emotion is fear
Yeah.
for her own
Yes.
safety. If she had been in a fabulous mood and was a naturally gregarious person, and you know she could
I
have
think
done all
culturally
sorts
she's
of
not
things.
necessarily automatically
But
gregarious.
she is afraid for her safety. And what she says to Jack is, I would have been scared if it had been any man following me into a deserted garage without using an access card. And that could be true.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of
It could be that if a white man that she did not recognize followed her into that garage,
That should have happened.
she would still have been scared. She might have reacted exactly the same way. Does she have racial stereotypes? She might.
Yeah.
Would she have responded the same way if it had been a white man? She might have.
And if that had been a white man in a Taurus wearing a tank T-top, that is not what you expect in an attorney, in a law firm, coming in without an access card. Take his race out of it, you know, you do think, you know, she's driving a Volvo, she's thinking somebody in the law firm's probably gonna have something other than a Taurus, and he was in a tank top, he was in workout clothes. It's not the expectation that you have in your head. So a female thinking of that, you know, he doesn't look like a lawyer. I don't care what color he is in that moment.
But it was a Saturday and a weekend.
So,
It didn't
let me
happen.
ask you, there's something that's kind of bugging me about this. They were pulling into a parking garage, right? A parking garage is not necessarily only for the law firm.
Not necessarily.
So it could have been anyone else working in a building in that general area, okay? Also, if in fact she was that fearful of for her safety, why didn't she just go out the exit?
Yes. If you're so fearful.
Instead of getting out, if you're fearful, just, you know where the exit sign is?
Yes.
Drive your car to the exit sign and go out of the garage. That's another option that's available.
I look at fear. Fear is nothing but false evidence appearing real. Okay. Now, if you look at the insert on this page, it says, to be honest with you, I was also thinking about two of my friends who had been mugged.
Yeah.
One in a parking garage and the other one on a subway platform. Now, this is a woman, an Asian woman, and it would be the same thing for me. I'm a black woman. And if I'm going in a garage and somebody's not going to use an access card and going to follow behind me, I'm going to appear to be fearful too.
But I'm not gonna get out.
But I'm not going to get out of my car.
I'm not going to get out.
People can follow you up. You know, I have seen it, you know, where people, and I guess I get it from being in the city,
You coming down the road at night, and these are some dark roads at night, okay? Called country roads. And I have been coming from work when I was working at night. And certain cars would come, as long as they pass me, I'm fine. But you let a car stay behind me. I am not going home. I'm gonna go opposite from home to see whether or not they're gonna follow me. Because when a car just follows you at night and I'm by myself, it's no good. I am not going home, because I learned that years ago when I was working with the police department. You don't go to you're supposed to go, because you either go to the police or fire station or someplace where there's a light and people. But I have had cars to follow me at night, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, coming home from work. And I said, okay, it's time for me to slow down and let them pass, because I don't want to create a sense of road rage. But it is fearful. It is fearful, regardless, when it comes to a woman.
And the bottom line with this is we are all giving our impressions of this based on our internal. We don't know, in Hope's case, whether fear, true fear, was the reason that she did this, or racism was the reason. We don't know. Combination of both.
But out of one of these things, I've got to say this because I got a son and two grandsons. I'm going home and tell them, be careful how you wear tank tops. And hoodies. And hoodies. Okay, because after Trayvon was killed, and with the hoodie situation, I'm telling you, I went around looking at how many white people wore hoodies. A whole lot.
Oh, yeah.
I literally, my eyes was open. You mean, some people can wear hoodies and some can't? And so when you send your black child out in any way, you gotta prepare them for that world of how the folks are gonna look at them.
How they don't perceive.
Yes.
Perceive.
It doesn't matter what you wear. I'm fearful as a black man. Only thing I know I won't get shot in is a clergy collar.
Yeah, I'd wear it. I'll wear it. I'd wear it.
But that's just a reality that, because it's built on what Dylan encouraged, was this idea that the world has already looked at me negatively. I'm already a threat to everybody I walk up on. He got out of the car realizing in his mind possibly that he was presumed a threat to Hope already. He said a word to him. So I mean, there's this internalized oppression we talked about earlier is part of the challenge of what do you bring when you walk into a situation, which is why black people have been told to dot every I and cross every T, which is my first recommendation to Dylan, is swipe your card.
Swipe your card.
So you don't have to create these questions in the environment. And that's part of the challenge of black people having to do extra to make sure they make everybody else feel comfortable in the room. Where if it was somebody else pulled up behind her, a white man didn't know, it may or may not be the same response, but Dylan pulling up behind her definitely has a different response in America. This is the American culture. Remember, Hope has essentially bought into American culture, too, don't forget.
Yes.
She's a partner.
As we saw.
I think it's also important to remember that white parents have their talk too. I mean, both of my children were taught the policeman is not your friend. If you are confronted by a policeman, you are either a witness or a suspect, and those roles can change at any point in time. If nobody talks, everybody walks. When a policeman approaches your car, you lock the doors. You roll your window down 4 inches. You hand out your... We have to talk too, because it's about safety. Now, I agree, it is not about perception. It is not about prejudgment. It is about safety. But we have to talk too.
Good to know. That's a good point.
Also put both hands on the
Yes, hands up at all
And
times.
drive way off the road and drive, if you are a woman, drive to a lighted location. I have run my tires down to the rim driving to a lighted location with a flat tire on these roads, because I am not going to be parked by the side of the road with a flat tire.
And that's the other thing about fear. Sometimes it's false evidence appearing real. Sometimes a woman really is in danger. And there are plenty of women who try to tamp down their feelings of danger, and that's the opportunity that someone has to harm them.
You know, I would say whether you're male or female, don't stop unless there's light around, unless you're under a light or in a populated area.
You better hope they still
But
gonna
going
shoot you in the
back to
back.
Hope, she has an additional complication in corporate America, that being that if she had been a male coming in on a Sunday, and this gentleman, regardless of who he was, this vehicle who came in behind them, not having swiped a card, if anything had happened in that building, and that had been a male partner, and he had not responded to that because of fear, he would be out the door. And she knows that as a female partner, that she had better buck up her fear and go do her job, because she is already in a more tenuous place in that law firm than any man would ever be. So she could not allow fear to make her not react to a threat to that building. So that situation forced her to move forward maybe when she felt very out of her comfort zone doing it.
Operating all the time. This is becoming a television scene. There's one comment I wanted to make, and then we'll move on to the next item. And it has to do with black folks and Asian folks, or anybody and anybody. There's a very primitive thing happening in the amygdala, which has to do with otherness.
Yes.
Okay, so any other. And it is so easy for us to develop stereotypes. In terms of the Asian situation, might not have had anything to do with where that person came from, but you were other. You were
That's
other.
exactly what I felt.
And-
That's why I got out of there.
Yeah, but it happens with men and women in terms of, it's so basic. It's other clan, going all the way back. It's other gender, anything other, anything that is not exactly the same as we are. All of these things rise to the surface. So by pointing them out, it allows us to acknowledge it's going to happen. There's no way for it not to happen. No, you know how they'll say, got to be colorblind? No, we're not going to be colorblind, but it's what you do after you do that. It's the next thing, the next thing. And that's what we have control over. A lot of stuff we don't have any control over. Yes?
Just that in terms of otherness.
Yes.
That it's been said before this morning, it's my belief that when we learn who each other is, that there will be no problem with otherness. And that's all of the things I've been hearing this morning and reading out here. Otherness certainly is a part of the fear and whatever else that, when you come through. Is there a model, any place, that otherness is just the beginning of a discussion about racism, or how short or how tall or how fat? Is there a model?
Well, that's what we're doing.
We're doing that.
We're exploring it, yeah.
You make me think of the Samaritan woman at the well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It's, the opportunities, thanks to the Holy Spirit, are everywhere to begin to work on this. But I think we don't realize how pervasive it is, and that it is at every step, at every stage, every day, in every hour. And we are better at managing it in some cases than we are in others. And in this particular case, getting back to the reason we're together, because of the things that we saw in the video, because it's black and white, it's harder than ever.
And even if you desperately don't want to hold any prejudices or any racism in your heart, you don't know the experience of the other culture. Like I was sitting here listening to what Tyron was saying about how segregation was so or integration was so damaging to black culture, and how he had those role models, he had that sense of community, he had that. I had no knowledge of that. So I'm sitting here listening to him, but I had never, ever, as a white person, considered how much was taken away from him in the gaining of so much in the broader picture, perhaps how much maybe was taken from him and from his culture. I was sitting here going, could have had a V8. I mean, why didn't I see that? Well, how could I not have appreciated that? I only saw it from one point of view. And I desperately hope and pray that I'm not a racist. I want more than anything to have none of that in my heart. None of that in my heart.
You didn't.
But that doesn't change what I don't know. And only through the kind of conversations that we're having can I gain an appreciation. Right? So I was just sitting here like, you know, and I'm like, oh my
Like it's
God.
bound to be better for them
God.
because we have something better than they have.
I was gonna say, superiority though.
Well, but you know, and I say gaining something in the larger picture because I think of the United States of America and our ability to function as a cohesive country, as a cohesive people. We all need to be on equal footing for that to work. So I'm thinking in terms of American, not black, white, but I was just,
Yeah. There was a level of responsibility and accountability that was ingrained in us within our community, where you did depend upon someone else to do for you what you could do for yourself.
Exactly.
And we've lost much of that.
and I would have had no idea that the process of integration would have had that unintended consequence.
But we have to take action. We just can't talk about the problem amongst ourselves. We have to, as he said, we have to go to these meetings, make ourselves heard, because then they won't exhibit the racism that they do if 2 or 3 of us are sitting there watching him get slaughtered. And I feel like getting up there, and I'm sorry, but throwing some of these people. I know it's unchristian, but I'm sorry, that's how I feel. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on. For the most, and pass this to David.
We're going to engage in another exercise. Is everybody all right with moving outside?
Yeah.
Won't be long, it'll be kind of nice to get a break, stand up and take a break. I just looked and the parking lot is empty pretty much on this side over here, so if we can gather out there, we will do the exercise there.
There's sunshine out there.
There is sunshine. I am reasonably confident that in the face of an affordable housing crisis, I can find a neighborhood which I can afford, where my neighbors will be neutral or pleasant toward me. I am reasonably confident that in the face of an affordable housing crisis, I can find a neighborhood which I can afford, where my neighbors will be neutral or pleasant toward me. My race is widely represented in virtually all communication media in meaningful roles. My race is widely represented in virtually all communication media in meaningful roles. My race is widely represented in virtually all communication media in meaningful roles. When I read or hear about our national heritage, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. When I read or hear about our national heritage, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. When I read or hear about our national heritage, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials in school that testify to the existence and contributions of my race. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials in school that testify to the
Did you say
I can readily find a hairdresser or barber in my community who knows how to deal with my hair. I can readily find a hairdresser or barber in my community who knows how to deal with my hair. I can be sure that my skin color will not detract from my appearance and financial responsibility. I can be sure that my skin color will not detract from my responsibility. I can be sure that my skin color will not detract from my appearance and financial responsibility. In my community, I can easily buy books, posters, greeting cards, and magazines from nearly every retailer of these items that feature people of my race. Everybody hear me? So I can move on? Yep. I can take a job with any employer without concern that others will think I got the job because of my race.
You're not going to have us walk out in that road.
It depends.
All right.
How many more questions are there?
Enough to get us there.
Okay, so I'm out in the road then.
Last one, I'm going to repeat the last one. I am free of implications that my shape, my bearing, or my body odor are reflections of my race. I am free of implications that my shape, my bearing, or my body odor are reflections of my race. If I need legal, medical, or other professional help, I can be sure to find a competent professional of my own race within reasonably close distance, and that my race will not work against me. If I need legal, medical, or other professional help, I can be sure to find a competent professional of my own race within reasonably close distance, and that my race will not work against me. I like this one too. I can be late to a meeting without having my tardiness attributed to my race. I heard somebody talk about that. I can be late to a meeting without having my tardiness attributed to my race.
How's she far away?
This is getting greater, I'm sorry.
Hey, Mr. Sidner, pull me up there with you.
Most of the children I know have access to the internet.
What?
Most of the
Most
children
of the
I know.
have access to the internet.
They got access.
I'm glad.
Not budging on that one.
I am stopped by a traffic police officer, audited by the IRS. I can be pretty sure that I have not been racially profiled. Did you all hear it down there?
Yep.
I can generally be assured that my children will learn about history and culture from the point of view that affirms how people look like me. There are lots more than I can stop. Take a look. Stop. Stay in place. When I look at this, it really makes the point of what we're
David,
doing.
the source of those questions is interesting. I know, I can't remember the lady's name, but
Peggy McIntyre.
Peggy McIntyre.
Peggy
yeah.
McIntyre. Right.
Who sort of developed the idea of white privilege.
Yes. And it's written extensively on it. All right. We can move back in now that you've been, excuse me, hold on.
I have a white friend.
Just a second.
We'll be friends today. Anyway.
Back to your place.
Michael has his presentation on white privilege. Remember your mind, talk about the oyster?
Yes.
This is exactly what he's talking about. There's a line that goes here, and the line trying to keep that in mind when you think about this. This is the gap he's talking about. He's talking about this.
We're back. It was nice, wasn't it, outside?
Yes.
I love that exercise because it is, in all that we do, it's one of those things that really shows very clearly what we're talking about. And answering those questions places us so that we can take a look and visually see what we're talking about in terms of what we're getting into now in terms of white privilege. As we go into a deeper discussion of white privilege, we're going to have 3 stories. These belong to each person, Lucia, Charles, and me, that really, I think, will talk a little more in depth about white privileges as we've experienced it. So I'm going to ask Lucia if she'll come up.
So I was born in 1968. I think that may make me the youngest person here today. No, Linwood?
I was born in 79.
All right. Second youngest person here today. So I missed the civil rights movement because I was a toddler.
You were what?
I was a toddler for a significant part of it, or not even born yet. And so I did not go to schools that were segregated by law. And I had parents who said, well, you know, people have different skin colors, but we're all equal, and it's important to treat everybody equally. I don't remember ever having been taught any overt racism. I don't remember everybody. I don't remember anybody telling me that discrimination was a good thing. At the same time, I lived in a world that was very much de facto segregated. When my parents moved to Pittsburgh, they chose a neighborhood with a good school district, and it just so happened that there were few to no black people living there. That wasn't a decision that they were intentionally trying to avoid black people, but they wanted good schools for their kids, and so they went to where they were, and it was a place that I lived in a white world. So I went to school with white people, I went to church with white people, I went to Girl Scouts with white people. And that in itself was a form of white privilege, that I lived in my world. And I was dimly aware that there were other people living in other circumstances, with other problems, other situations, other struggles. But they were not part of my experience. And there were a few exceptions to that. There was, by the time I got to high school, there was one black kid in most of my classes. He was vice president of the senior class and very likable. Had one black teacher when I was in 6th grade. But those were always the exceptions. Same thing when I went to college, same thing when I went to grad school, same thing when I had my job, that there were a few black people here and there, a few Asian people here and there. But for the most part, I was very definitely in the majority. And that I'm also a child of economic privilege as well as white privilege, and that meant that I had all sorts of opportunities to pursue a top-notch education, to have access to all sorts of good jobs, to be able to make mistakes and be able to recover from them in a way that not everybody has the opportunity to recover. So I feel like I'm very much a beneficiary of white privilege, which also gives me the chance to, if I want to make a concerted effort to learn more about the lives of black people, there are ways that I can do that. But that I don't really have to deal with issues of race in my daily life if I don't feel like it. And so I've grown up in an environment and have lived a lot of my adulthood in an environment in which I just haven't been paying a whole heck of a lot of attention, which is a luxury that I have because of white privilege that many people do not have.
Are you acting? Are you acting or are you real? Are you real with your statement?
Yes.
I'm trusting you.
Good question.
Go picture.
I didn't know if you were put on the spot to say some of the things that you're saying. It's bothering me, some of the things you're saying. That's why I asked you. But go ahead, move on.
So that's my life.
That's okay.
That's okay.
That's all right.
That's all right. That's good.
I've been reading about white fragility also, and that, you know, which comes down at its simplest form to say, you know, okay, racism is bad. I'm not a bad person. Therefore, I'm not racist. And it really is as simple as that. And the idea that because I don't want to be prejudiced, then I'm or bigoted or racist or to have any biases. Since I don't see any of that in myself, then therefore it must not exist. And, you know, I believe in treating everybody equally. And at the same time, I know that I couldn't possibly be treating everybody equally. That when they run studies on people who say, okay, I want you to evaluate all these resumes, that the people who evaluate them differently based on whether there is a name that is associated with black people at the top of the page, or whether there's a name that's associated with white people on the top of the page. If somebody asks you, would you treat those two resumes differently? You would say no. But they do studies, and it turns out that people do. Would I like to think that I'm the one exception in American culture to this, and that I could not possibly do that sort of thing? Of course I would hope that I'm that person. That does not seem at all likely to me, that I have been immune to that, or that I have been immune to all of the other messages that are constantly coming through my society. So I'm sure that I have biases that I'm not aware of. I'm sure that all the little things that go into human interaction, how long do you hold eye contact with someone? How do you respond emotionally to another person? I'm sure that that has been affected in me by the culture that I've been a part of, and that I continue to perpetuate without being aware of what I'm doing. So that's one of the reasons that that I'm glad for this group. I'm glad for the opportunities to get some of the stuff that is underneath up to the surface where it's easier to deal with it. And better for me to be able to have the chance to listen to people whose experiences have not been the same as mine, because one of the elements of white privilege is that I see the world that I live in, and I think, well, this is the world. And I think my world is the world. And it's not the world. It's a very small segment that is presented as the world, because the world that other people live in is very different.
Thank you.
Since I'm 72 years old, I can talk a long time about my life. So somebody give me a time check at a 10-minute thing.
All right.
All right. I want to begin by saying that some of the things I will share with you are offensive to me now. They weren't once upon a time. And I'm sure they'll be offensive to you as well. But it's the truth. It's real. It's the way it was. I was born in Kinsale in Westmoreland County in 1944, when my father was 44 years old, which means, of course, he was born in 1900, which means my grandfather was born shortly after the Civil War and had a brother who was actually in it. So history of the Northern Neck presses upon my family. It's part of who I am and was, and I guess always will be. But there's a lot about that history I never knew until recently. It's a strange heritage to have. We grew up wonderfully excited about history and proud of Thomas Jefferson. Well, I still am for some reasons. My father was a barber in Kinsale for many years. He didn't make much money. But growing up, we had a maid, a black maid. And at the time, I didn't think anything about that. Now I think, why on earth could we afford a black maid who came and cleaned the house and did the cooking and washed clothes and ironed them? Because I think now we were living into and out of keeping people in their place. I didn't see it then, of course. She was a wonderful lady. I remember her well. And I need to say, in the context of saying all of this, you know, it's interesting how the church gets to be a victim of the culture. My father was superintendent of the Sunday school for 47 years. Does that mean I went to Sunday school every Sunday? You better believe it.
Yes.
My grandmother taught Sunday school for 60 years in Gold Parish. My mother sang in the choir for 60 years. You could hardly be more active in the church. But the church mostly did not challenge the culture we lived in. So as far as I was concerned, these were all okay norms to live into. Didn't know otherwise. Of course, I went to a segregated school. I remember with great regret now when Lindsay Almond, the governor, was advocating separate but equal. I listened to him on the old Zenith radio and said, yay, that's right, do it. I'm surprised I did that, but I had no other models, I suppose, at the time. When I was about to make the decision to go off to college, our high school guidance counselor counseled my family and me, and I was the first one on either side of the family to go to college. Very carefully to consider going to a small private school. Because as a little kid from a small country high school, I might get lost in a bigger school. I wanted to go to William & Mary. Oh, you know, you got to go to the University of Richmond. Great place, I'm glad I went there. But I didn't see anything racist about that then. I think now I do. A small private college. You won't meet very many people who are different from you. At least then you didn't. I never thought about that before. Never thought about it before these dialogue groups. Well, the other thing I didn't tell you about our black maid is that she died in the back seat of my mother's car when my mother was taking her home. And the other thing I didn't tell you about her is that somehow the spirit got moving a little bit with me in high school, because as an uppity teenager, I said to my parents, why doesn't she have lunch with us? And why does she eat on the back porch? And my parents said, because she doesn't want to eat lunch with us. But I would be willing to say they never asked her. Sorry to backtrack to that, but I wanted to share it with you. Well, we had a yard man who helped with the yard, and I remember as a kid, he offered me a cookie when he was eating lunch, and I took the cookie and enjoyed it. Came in, my mother chewed me out. Don't take food from a black man, it might be dirty. I also was told, don't shake hands with a black man, you might get dirty. These are the offensive things. But the way it was. The way it was. Well, college was a transforming experience. I joined the Canterbury Club. In the Episcopal Church, college students often have a Canterbury Club, and was exposed to a different world view and a different world from the one I grew up in. And pretty soon we went off to the Atlanta University Center as a Canterbury Club for a conference as a black and white group in a Volkswagen bus, by the way, which wouldn't go into fourth gear. And it took a long time to get there in third gear. Well, we got it. The Atlanta University Center was in the middle of a very black neighborhood. And these were the days when Lester Maddox was selling axe handles in his restaurant so you could beat up on black people. And we were told in that environment that we as kids should not go out by ourselves into that neighborhood and should be very careful where we go and what we do. Well, if you tell a teenager they should not do something. So at the first opportunity, I went out exploring in the neighborhood by myself. And it was extremely hot, and after a while I was about to droop, so I ducked into a drugstore, which had a soda fountain, and sat down and asked for a Coke. And suddenly realized I was in an all-black neighborhood. This was an all-black drugstore. And Lester Maddox was selling axe handles to white people to beat black people up. And these folks were wonderfully gracious and accepting of me and to me. And we had a great conversation. And at some point in all of that, I thought, oh God, wonder what it's like the other way around. Be totally rejected. It was a great still moment. It was part of my conversion to have that experience. Later, I went off to seminary and started a ministry in Sterling, Virginia, but of course I grew up in an all-white church, and I started an all-white congregation, and there were no black members that ever joined, and all of that was bothered me. Didn't quite know what to do about it, as a matter of fact. Went off to Fredericksburg, and my wife and I were going to buy a house at that point, so we got a mortgage very easily. Then I met my friend Lawrence Davies, the black pastor of Shiloh Old Site Church. He told me when he came to Fredericksburg, it took him about 3 years to get a mortgage. He had a better income than I did, and a lot more savings than I did. He couldn't get a loan. I got a loan instantly. I think that was maybe my first insight into white privilege. I didn't know I had that, but I did. Later on, I think after that realization, I was willing to take more risks. And this is something I mentioned the other day, that we formed the Community Relations Council, and we started talking to bankers about why they didn't have any people in minority employment, or minorities in management, and things like that. So that's certainly part of my story. I think in recent years, I've become much more in tune with my white privilege and the need to treat all people equally, partly out of the Episcopal Church revised its prayer book and started having the renewal of a baptismal covenant, often, 4 times a year at least. We didn't used to do that. Baptisms were private. They were on Saturday afternoon with excuse for a cocktail party afterwards. But when you start putting this stuff on Sunday morning, and we all have to renew our covenant, and we pledge in that covenant to respect the dignity of every human being, it comes right in your face. It has to become part of you, or else you might as well leave if you're not Christian anymore. And I'm living more into and out of that than I ever did before in my life, and I'm glad, and I'm thankful the Spirit's moving that way. Got a long ways to go. I said in the first one of our meetings of this dialogue group, I hope I'm a recovering racist. Want to be, trying to be. Working on it. Working on it. The last thing I guess I'll share, part of my most recent life experience, was we had a clergy group, and John L. Johnston, were you there? John L. Johnston lives in Colonial Beach. He's a member of St. Mary's Episcopal Church. He was a black man working in the Clinton administration on race relations. It was Clinton, wasn't it? I think it was Clinton. He is a Jungian psychologist with a worldwide reputation and has lectured all over the world. Very brilliant man. He came and talked to our little group, clergy group, and he forgot his cell phone. He came from Colonial Beach over to, where were we meeting, Alicia?
Where? Down near Gloucester.
Down near Gloucester. And he said, you know, I have to tell you that I'm really scared that I left my cell phone at home, because he said, in Westmoreland County, I know the sheriff and the policeman, and they know me, but he said, if I'm on the road home and I get pulled over because, for any reason, and I don't know what might happen to me. And I don't have a cell phone. I usually call my wife before I leave a destination and say, I'm on my way, and she will have some idea of the time frame, and will be glad to know when I get home safely. And I thought, I don't have to do that. Here's this man of a distinguished reputation who's telling me he's kind of scared as a black man to drive up the road because of profiling. Wow. Wow. He got home safely, I'm glad to say. But in our little gathering, he asked a question which caused me to think. He said, when was the first time you realized you were white? And after I thought about it, I thought, oh my God, that's the ultimate statement of white privilege. I never had to think about when was the first time I was white. It never occurred to me. I never had to. And that's where white privilege comes back, I think. So, I've done my 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You guys are hard act to follow here. I don't mean act in a negative sense either. I mean, seriously. As I'm listening to these two talk, I'm reminded of how much I am learning. I'm reminded of how much, in a sense of the word, how ignorant I was growing up. but ignorant under kind of a different set of circumstances, a different understanding of that. I grew up in South Mississippi. I hear the grunts.
Right.
I grew up in South Mississippi, in rural South Mississippi, and was raised by my grandparents, my mother's parents, after my parents were divorced. And those two grandparents were, and still are, though they've both moved on to the fullness of the kingdom, they were the most significant two people in my life. And growing up on a farm, if you've done that, and I know this is rural Virginia here, you know it's very, very difficult. It's a hard life. It certainly used to be before things were more mechanized and all that. Granddad had a lot of folks. This was a large farm. He had a lot of people who would come in and help. You ever pick cotton? You may have done it. Hurt your hands. You don't have cotton here. Hurt your hands. I saw some in Surrey County a few years ago. It hurts your hands. It's a tough job. It's a tough job. But that's what he was farming, was raising cotton. You got to have a lot of folks. It was very labor intense. And so he had people with him who were both white and black. My granddad, over time, my grandmother got into some difficulties with the community because he firmly believed, both of them did, that we are all created equal in the eyes of God. Equal in the eyes of God. And their definition of all men are created equal was different than Thomas Jefferson's. Again, it was different. I saw two people who opened their home, their hearts, their tables, to all people who were willing to sit with them and to be with them. Quite remarkable. I also saw a church that ostracized them. That's not the way we do it. Just not the way we do it. To the point that my grandfather and grandmother both pulled away from church and decided that they could no longer be part of it. What I've learned through all of these sessions that we facilitate, and I learn a lot every time we do this, is that I was a, how would I say it, victim of white privilege. Without even realizing it, because I didn't have to realize it. I didn't have to think about it. Somebody pointed out, and I think that it was John L. In fact, I'm almost positive it was when we talked, when we did this part of the presentation at one point in one of our sessions, that I realized that when the black folks were invited to come to the white table, that was an exercise in white privilege.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm telling the story, but from my perspective, and it was not from white privilege, not at that moment, even though it was part of the white privilege module, I hadn't seen that part of it as white privilege. Because I didn't have the experience of his eyes. I had my experience. Now, was it right or wrong? Well, I'm saying that. I think my grandfather did it with the very best of intentions, because he truly and firmly believed in that statement that all are created by God, in God's image. But it doesn't mean that I haven't also experienced benefits of white privilege. What fortunately it did for me was to help set the stage that as I grew and as I moved into a situation in high school where we had forced integration, all those things that we were talking about in terms of civil rights, that I was prepared a bit differently than some of the other folks that I was living with and among. I made friends with many of the black students, was a little ostracized because of that. You know, some of the white folks would say, okay, there you go. And there were certain terms they used, or people like me, they were. What I have learned was also that white privilege, in the sense of where though it's something I don't control, I have it because of the color of the skin, it is not something I necessarily have to live out when I become aware of it. I can do things, not as a result of white privilege, but as a result of choice. I can choose to be with other folks of different color. Now, some would say, well, that's white privilege also, because by virtue of the fact you can choose. And perhaps so. But I think that foundation was laid many, many years ago by two good people who were prepared to take the consequences of a community that didn't see things the way that they did. When I got into college, one of my closest friends, I was in band, and I was a drummer, a percussionist, and one young man came along. His name was Willie. Willie was a 6 feet 4 inch, 265-pound young black man. And Willie and I became best of friends very quickly. In fact, we nicknamed each other. I was daylight, he was dark. We were in school at that point in time in college in a very southern small town. Talking about small schools, it was a very small community college. And we'll never forget the time that we decided that we wanted to go into town. We were hungry. We didn't have enough dinner. We could never feed Willie enough anyway, because he was just always eating. We walked into town, and when we got back to that school, somebody said to us, "Where'd you guys go? Where were you?" Thinking that we were out on the campus somewhere. So we walked into town. They said, "Whoa, this is 1972. You walked into town together?" "Yes." "On the same side of the sidewalk?" "Yes." And one of them, I'll never forget, says, "Holy God," and they lived to tell about it. Even in 1972, we were still wondering what all this stuff means. And white privilege, though we didn't, I don't know that I'd ever heard the term. I certainly hadn't heard it in 1972. In one sense of the word, it was taking a risk to walk with Willie into that town, but I was also exercising white privilege because I was pretty confident, at least from my perspective, that nothing was going to happen. I didn't think that way. But I've subsequently learned that we have to. We have to. Something important to say about white privilege is we don't choose it. I did not choose to be born of 2 white parents. It was the way it was and the way it is. I don't think we have to or need to feel guilty about the color of our skin. I think what we need to understand is that we have a choice in the way that we act, in the way that we respond. And to realize that even though that as white people we live with white privilege by virtue of the color of our skin, we don't have to act out of that without being sensitive to other people. I learned something today when Tyrone, when you talked about the civil rights movement. I heard from your eyes a different side of white privilege, believe it or not. Because when you think about what happened in civil rights, or when I do, I think, wow, there was really an effort, good efforts made for these folks to help them and to integrate them into society as a whole, and to help better reflect that all of us are created as God's children, no matter the color of our skin. But I never really considered what that meant from your perspective. So thank you. I'm learning more and more what this white privilege means. Sometimes the term is white privilege, but it's really not necessarily privilege.
If I may, there's a book called Blowing the Trumpet in Open Court by Boykin Sanders. He talks specifically about what I was sharing today, which will give you an indication of what life was like and how it changed for the African American community as a result of integration. He was one of my professors in seminary, and when I first heard him make that statement, it was in Introduction to New Testament, and he made that statement. I thought he was crazy until he started talking about the realities of what that meant. And I think if you would just read a bit of it, even just the introduction, it will cause you to see some things in a different perspective that you never dreamed of. Because we did, as a community, we thought integration was going to be the thing that helped us move further along and be successful. But it had a downside that was never expected, nor I'm believing never intended.
Okay, folks, we're about to break for lunch. I just wanted to give you a preview of what we're going to do this afternoon. When we come back, we're going to talk about something called internalized depression. That's the mirror image of white privilege. And it happens in the way we're going to talk about it in the United States. But I assure you it happens in other societies where there is a suppressed group and a group with power who are the oppressors. So what you will experience this afternoon, you can see happening all over the world. Look at what's happening in the Muslim world between the Shia and the Sunni, for instance. Look at what happens in our beloved Africa among clans. Look at what happens between men and women. In some cases, it's very obvious and very, very horrible. In other cases, it's more subtle, harder to deal with, but it's there. So, internalized oppression we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about something, and when I do my little part, it'll be responding to the notion of the intersection of racism and class. Very, very interesting dynamic. None of this is simple, I guess you gathered that. And then after that, we're going to break you into groups and we're going to mix you up. And you're going to talk in your group about a time when you've experienced successful change. And you're going to be asked to write down what it was that made it successful. And then after that, in that same mixed up group, you're going to talk about a vision of an alternative reality. And that's where we are hoping that you will talk about what this group can do next. Okay, an alternative reality. And then we'll bring you back together, and each group will talk about how their conversation went and what ideas have come up. One has already surfaced that was really exciting to me, and Lucia. It came from Dawn, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. It was very exciting, and I want to come. Okay, and then after that, we're going to wrap up. We'll have some devotions, and then we will say goodbye. There's one thing I like to do at the end of these sessions sometimes, and we'll stand in a circle, and we'll hold each other. And each one of us, as we are moved, will say, I will know that we have had an impact on racism when I see. And you can describe what you see or what you hope to see in the deepest part of your heart. So that's the afternoon. In the meantime, have lunch.
But can I say one last thing before we go?
Yes.
I want to thank Lucia, Charlie, and David for their sharing, because I think it's important that we put a face with the subject that we're talking about to help us understand, and having the courage to sit there and open yourselves up and be vulnerable, I think is extremely important, and it's just another further evidence of the Holy Spirit working within this group, and especially the three of you. Thank you all so much.
Stickers. Who has that great bumper sticker?
One, but you on my costs.
No, not that one. The bumper sticker that says, "Fight bigotry." That has, mine. I want. Where do I get it? I got it.